now's the time to update your fonts. And fonts is actually a similar philosophy to colors, where we lock down a palette of colors so that in the editor, our content team could only choose the colors that we have chosen for them. Well, fonts is exactly the same. We're going to now create a palette of fonts for our content team to use in the editor. And the reason for this, and this is one of the biggest problems I see in website design, is that platforms allow the content team to go in at any time in the future and they give a whole library of fonts for people to choose from. That's a nightmare, because that means our content team can now be tempted to select fonts that are not in our brand guidelines, and they will, right? So we need to lock down the fonts and don't allow people to select them in the editor. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Let's go over to the editor and let's put a cursor here on this particular piece of text, and let's go over to our fonts. Well, here you can see all of my headings, and for each of the headings I can have a different style. Well, this is another key point of why content editors tend to be a bit tempted to choose fonts, because they know, as a content team, the power of SEO. So they know you should only really have one heading 1 on a page, and maybe 2 heading 2s and 3 heading 3s. It's almost like a pyramid, a hierarchy. So typically if fonts are created, then that heading 1 is always going to be bigger, okay? But what if they need to have a heading 3 lower down in the page, or a heading 5, but still make it large, okay? So this is the idea around creating a nice palette of fonts so that it considers all users and gives them that flexibility, so that they don't need to introduce new fonts into the platform, and they can always optimize the page for things like SEO. My experience tells me that there's always 2 very distinct types of users at this point. Now, typically we've got website designers or people that understand branding and have got quite a reasonable knowledge of fonts. And then often in business we've got some newbies in terms of design that don't understand it and would like to understand more. So in this session, I'm actually going to take like 3 minutes now for, if you understand fonts, I'm just going to give you a quick 3-minute overview, 3 tasks really, that you can now just go in the fonts area here, just do these 3 tasks and move on. And then we'll probably I'll go really slow for the final 20 minutes so that people can understand fonts, and by the end of this session you'll be just as good as those other designers that have moved ahead. So what are these 3 tasks? Well, it comes down to using the bots to do all the hard work for you. Okay, so what we'll do here, we're just in the fonts area, which is from styles, and then fonts is the 3rd tab along. Now you can see here, I'll just draw your attention to heading 1. Okay, now in the onboarding I chose Roberto Condensed because I didn't have my font there. I need Roberto Mono for my that's in my brand guidelines. So here I will actually just remove this and type in Robot, and you can see I've got Roberto Mono here. Brilliant. I'm going to select that. Now I could go through all of these fonts and start replacing them, okay, but all I need to do now, I've chose Roberto as my typeface here, so I'm just going to apply this typeface to all and just click this. Now the bot runs it and it goes and replaces them all for us, so you don't need to wait too long for that. You can see it load. The preview actually takes longer to load on the right. Pretty quick. So that's your first task. Choose your first typeface. Now, if you remember from the onboarding earlier, I said when you're choosing your heading, choose a conservative one. And then for your more display ones, choose a more poppy one. Well, you've just seen that in the editor, where we can have heading 1, and we can make it in this heading 1, or we can give it another style and make it a bit more poppy. That's pretty cool, right? So what I wanted to do is show you, now that all of these are in our conservative Roberto Mono, I just want to go and show you which fonts here to apply that more poppy typeface. Well, there are 3 places to do it. I would do it in all the styles, and later on in this video I'm going to explain what all these styles are, so you can skip ahead to those if you need to. There are indications here of what they do. Okay, so you go and replace all the styles with that more poppy one, and then go and replace the widget title and the widget price. So it's the widget price, the widget title. I would do all of the styles. You can come back and change these later as we move into day 3. You might want to come back once you're designing and change a couple of these. And then if you're using block quotes, you might change the block quote as well. So you're really just going to go and change those. So for me, I know that my Poppy one that I'm using for this theme is ShareTech Mono. So I would simply go through and replace ShareTech Mono. Now, once I've done that, I can now come back up here and get the bots to do the hard work for us. Well, in the theme, let me just go, I'll show you this first of all actually. I've got Roboto Mono selected here, but now I could take this typeface and go and make it a font. So for this heading 1, I can choose the desktop size, the mobile size, the line height, which is above and below the line, and the letter spacing between. I can also say which is the bold and regular that I want people to pick and choose from in the editor. And if you need to, you can actually lock down uppercase. You probably wouldn't ever lock down uppercase, but you can do if you want to. Particularly, you might do that for the header font, which you can see if I just jump back up down here to menu. You can see our header text is there. This one I might decide to capitalize that, to make uppercase. Cool. So I think you get that. Pretty good. So in here, I now would know that my theme has made these pretty good for me to begin with, and I can come back and change these if I want to, with the exception of 2 things. Now, as a designer, you know that there are 2 things with fonts that make a real difference, and it's line height and letter spacing. So line height being the text above and below in the lines, and then the letter spacing. Well, here in 2023, it can be quite contemporary for, let's say, paragraph text to have quite a loose line height, almost double line height spacing. So what we've said with the bots is we've actually said to the bots, we've got 3 kind of presets with the bots that they can go and apply. Right, so we've got tight, regular and loose. So if you do want a loose line height, just select loose. And then for your letter spacing, depending on your font, you might want it tighter or more regular or loose. And you can play around with these. So just select 1 line height and 1 letter space and hit apply, and then you'll see that our bots update in here. Then you can come over here in the preview and have a look and just play around with it. Now, this is based on the fact that Mobile have built hundreds of websites. So we've built our bots knowing the more common use cases. So it's most likely that we'll get you, if you're a designer and you want specific things, it's most likely that we'll get you very close with the bot. So that's going to save you having to go through each of these fonts in the palette and make them all out one by one. So you can just run the typeface, okay? Then you can go and choose some of these styles, and I recommend you probably change the 12 or maybe at least the first 6, and then go and change the widget title, the widget price, and maybe, if you like, the block quote as well. So that's it, and then you'll just come and choose and have a play with the line height and letter spacing, hit apply. Once you're happy in here, press save, and that's it. That's the episode done. So that can really take you about 5 minutes, but you know, it's worth having a bit of a play with. So I'd allow about 10 minutes to get this set up, and then have a play and decide what you like best, knowing that you can come into any of these fonts after you've used the bots and tweak them as you like.
Well, here we are in the fonts area, which, as you know by now, you can access via the main menu. If you click styles, and then in the top bar we select fonts. Okay, now the first thing I want to draw your attention to is where it says heading 1. This is the name of our first font. Now below that we have the ability to select a typeface. Now when selecting a typeface, there are 2 main choices. Do you want a serif or a sans serif? Well, serif just means there's tails or squiggly bits on the end of the characters, as opposed to sans serif, which means they don't have the tails or squiggly bits on the end of the characters. Sans being the word for without in French. So I want you to think, does your font need a serif or a sans serif. But also in the list here, you can select what we call display and handwriting and also monospace. Well, where it says heading 1 here, I can actually type over this as a preview to have a look and feel for the type of font that I need. Now, if you've got brand guidelines and if you're an existing brand, then you probably already know the font that you require. So this is where I want you to check your brand guidelines, or check whoever created your brand what your actual fonts are. Now, in the list here, we've got a list of Google fonts, but you can actually also add an Adobe font, but you do need a license for that, which you'd have to buy over on the Adobe Fonts website. So for the purpose of this episode, we're using the Google fonts that we've got here, which are free and also web safe, meaning they work on all browsers and all devices. Now, if you've had a branding agency and they've chosen a particular font for you that's not a Google font, you can go back to them and ask them for something similar that you can use. Or you can go into Google and there's a whole bunch of font matching websites where you can just upload an image of your font and it will match that for you. They work to a varying degree of success, but there are a lot of them. Font Maturator, what the font Squirrel has one, what font is like font. There's a whole bunch there that you can play with to get something very similar. And like I say, the best way is to go back to the person who chose that font for you and ask them to match it with a Google font. Well, here you can see I'm back in my brand guidelines and I've got two typefaces. I have ShareTech Mono and Roboto Mono. Well, I'll go back into the fonts area and I can now add these fonts. So I'll click the first typeface here on heading 1 and I'll type ROB, which gives me a filtered list of Roboto fonts. So I'm going to select Roboto Mono. And now notice the anchor links at the top. I can use the body to scroll down to the body fonts, which consists of paragraphs and forms. And I can also click the display font to go to our more poppy display fonts. Now this is where I would add my ShareTech Mono. So if I type share, it filters down, and now I can select ShareTech Mono. Okay, well I'll scroll back up to the heading fonts. And notice here that if I choose Roboto Mono and apply this typeface to all, it's going to populate all of the fonts that are available in one hit to save me having to populate them all. It's going to save a lot of time. Okay, so you can see here they're all now populated with Roboto Mono. But if I go back to my first display font, which you can see here, it says Style 1. Now I can just go through the display fonts that I want to put ShareTech Mono. Okay, so if I apply this first, ShareTech Mono, and I'll go through now the rest of the display fonts. Okay, so at this point you might be wondering, what do we mean by display font? Okay, what do we mean by this style font that you can see here? Well, to explain this, I'll just jump over to the editor. When you first go back into the editor, you'll notice that your changes haven't updated. So that's where we'll need to hit the refresh button if you've made any changes in the fonts area. So the editor will now pick up those changes for you. So just be conscious of that. If you're looking at old fonts in the editor, just hit refresh. Now, if you've used other platforms, you'll be used to heading fonts, these H tags. And these are important for styling your fonts and keeping them consistent, but they're also important for SEO. So when you set up a page, what Google likes to see is there's one heading 1. Maybe there's two heading 2s, and it's a hierarchy down through those headings. Well, if you're managing a web page, what if lower down in the page as a heading 4, you want a big poppy title, right? Then is that to say that if you follow Google's instructions or follow like other web platforms that you have to have this hierarchy and you can only use smaller fonts lower down the page? Well, that doesn't make sense for a design. Well, this is why at Mobile we have these display fonts. And you can see here in the editor, I have my normal heading fonts 1 to 6 here, but then I also can choose the style of those fonts. So this is where you can still have your nice SEO hierarchy with only one heading font, but you could have a heading 5 lower down in the page in style 1, as you can see here. And so that's why we have the two types at Mobile to give you that flexibility. So back in the fonts area, you can see this is why I was saying we will choose the heading font as a more conservative font. As a rule of thumb, this is just my advice to get you going. And then I'm using a more creative font, a more creative display font. In this case, I'm using Share Tech Mono. So I can go through all of these display fonts and turn them into Share Tech Mono. And that's my immediate advice. Make them all the conservative one, and then make your display fonts a more kind of poppy style. Right? So the only thing that you might change on that is down in the widgets, you might have the title to be your display font. And I often like to make the widget price Share Tech Mono, so the title and the price in the widgets pop a little bit more. So at any point I can press save and then hit the preview. If I scroll down here in the preview now, you can see my fonts have been updated. And if I look at my widget card, you can see both the price and the title are in Share Tech Mono. Okay, so that should make sense. Now, if we look back in the fonts area here, you'll see that we've also got these styles 7 through to 12. Well, back in the editor, you can see it only goes up to style 1 to 6. So what are style 7 to 12? Well, style 7 to 12 are kind of secret fonts that only the designer can see. Sometimes you don't want the content team to be messing around with certain fonts that only you want to use for yourself. So an example of that here, I'll jump over to the Alio site, and you can see I've got this really large font here. Now this particular font is there because as I scroll it moves to the right. So this is a very much of a design feature. Well, let's go and have a look how that's managed. Okay, so here in the editor I can see the font. If I just highlight this, you can see here that it's not a particular style. But if I look at the source code, I can see here that it's a heading tag, it's a H4, but it's in style 12. So I could change this style 12 here to style 7 or to style 8 and so forth, and it's now going to change to that particular style. So because designers know a bit of HTML and we want some secret fonts, this is how we manage it in the source code. We just literally mark it as, I could mark it as style 6 as normal and just change the 6 to 12. So 7 and 8 and 9 are those kind of secret fonts. 12 is what we reserve for a more poppy, like kind of large font by default. And then style 10 and style 11 are used for the shop and the member profile. There's fonts in there that sometimes you want to change, and we'll cover more on those two in day 4. So now we're going to go over and make the fonts. So you can see once we've got a typeface, we want to turn it into a font, right? So this is when we change the particular the size, or we've referred to before, the line height or the letter spacing, and the weights. So in the page editor we've got a weight for regular and also for bold. So by changing these settings for each, we actually make that typeface our font. Okay, so let's have a look here. We've got a desktop size. I can change this, and as I change this, all the heading 1s on the entire website will update at once. Right? So if you did change a font style, you don't have to go into every heading on every page to update it. You just do it here in this master control panel, and it's going to update everywhere. Again, the big advantage there is that we can do redesigns very quickly. Okay, so that's desktop font, but of course the font on the mobile doesn't want it to be that big, so we can also change the size of the font on mobile. Okay, so you can see here I can change this and then go over to the mobile preview, and you can see I can see the font here in that mobile size. So in a theme, we've got these nicely styled for you right out of the box. So often you won't need to change the sizes of the fonts, But you might just, in very particular instances when you're first doing the design, you might just say, you know, I might want to make this a little bit bigger. But I would say wait until we get to day 3 when we're designing the layouts, and then we can make those decisions on sizes there. And it'll just be tweaking them just slightly. On maybe not on every font, maybe on 1 or 2 fonts as we go through. Okay, so my advice is just leave that now. Just be conscious that you can change the size here, and when you do, it's going to update through every layout, every page that would be, in this case, a heading 1. Okay, now once we've set the mobile, I'll just put mine back to how it was. Then we can have a look at the line height. Well, the line height is the spacing above and below the actual characters, and then the letter spacing is the space between the characters. And then I think most people understand the regular weight, and then of course we have the bold weight. And then there's other particular examples here. We could lock down a particular font and say, right, this will always be italic. Okay, so, and that's often good for the brand guidelines. Maybe it's a particular quote or something like that you always want to be in italic. So keep that there in mind for now. And then we have what we call text transform, which is obviously uppercase, lowercase, and capitalize. Often with uppercase, a common example is using that in the header font. Sometimes you want to make sure that the header is always in capitals. But again, if you're unsure, just leave that, because people can control that themselves in the editor or in the page or navigation area. Okay, at this point I'm going to introduce you to line height and letter spacing. Now if you're a designer, you already know this, but if you're not a designer, sometimes you'll be wondering why a particular web page looks good and why on other times it does not. And that's often because when you've had a designer design a web page for you, they understand subtle differences like line height and letter spacing. So like I say, if you're not a designer, we don't expect you to know this, because we've got bots that are going to take care of it all in seconds, right? But it's also important in this episode just to show you what we mean and why this can make such a difference. So I'm just going to explain this now, and then I'm going to let you play with the bot so that you can choose yours in a particular preference. Okay, so let's look at this. And to explain this, I don't think there's any better font to explain this on than your paragraph text. Okay, so let me just click body and let's go to paragraph text, make font, and you can see here I've got my line height. Well, it's set to 1.6 here. And in my preview, I can see what 1.6 means there. Okay, so let's change it to 2. Well, 2 is actually the double line height. So to view that, I need to press save. Okay, now once I've saved, now I can hit the preview, which is like refreshing. Okay, so now look at my paragraph style. It's double height. So that should make sense there, because it's double, 2 is double. Okay, so now you kind of got your eye in. This is double, is what we call loose. But we could also change the letter spacing and make that more loose, or we could make it tight. So you can see here, tight, we could go to minus, or I could set it to 0. Now imagine if we had to go and do that for every font, because different size fonts in a ratio are going to have different line heights and letter spacing according to how big they are. And if you're a newbie, you're not going to understand that, right? Even a lot of designers don't understand that. A lot of designers will go actually into the page, individually into the page, and change that. Imagine how much work that is. We've already got the fonts area here that's doing a lot of the work for you. As you update one font, it goes and updates that entire font across the website. That's already a quick win. But now we use bots for an even quicker win. So look at this. Look at the bot at the top. My line height, I've got some presets which are tight, regular, and loose. So if I just select a particular one here, let me choose loose. And then with the letter spacing, let's say I could choose loose as well. I could always have less spacing tight and the line height loose. Okay, so like this. Well, we'll start with tight. So I'll make them both tight so that you can see, right? And then if I have a look in here, you can see how tight that is. I've got really tight space between the characters and really tight spacing between the lines. Okay, so in changing that, our bot goes and changes that across every font and then updates it across every page. So we'll do the same with regular so you can see the difference. Okay, so you can see it's a little bit more generous, and you can see here between the spaces and then between the lines, right? Okay, so I think you're starting to get what's happening here. So what I can do next is go and make them both loose. So if I look at this and press apply, then watch this. Now they are looser. Well, character spacing, that's quite loose. And then we've got the line height, which looks pretty good in loose. So I will just say there that right now in 2023, I would say that it is becoming quite contemporary to have a loose line height. It makes that text feel a little bit more legible. But with the letter spacing, it can be nicer, depending on the font that you have, okay, to have it a little bit tighter, right? So that's where I want you to have a play now. All you need to do in this episode is go and, first of all, put in your main font, your main typeface, and you're going to click apply that typeface to all. Then you're going to think about that display font. Do you want a more poppy one? You're probably going to put those to the first 6, and then you're going to apply it to maybe the widget, title, and maybe the price. You're going to press save. Then all you're going to do is go to the bot and choose a particular line height. If you're unsure, I would start with regular or loose. Okay, and then you're going to choose a particular character spacing. Okay, and that really is depending on your preference and the fonts. Then once you've applied that, press save, and really in the time I've even said that, in that 1 minute, you could have really completed all of your fonts in really an absolute sort of masterclass, with not understanding anything and just relying on our bots to do it all for you. Okay, so we'll wrap that little bit there, and now I'm going to go on to tell you a little bit more on how we can look at choosing font pairings. Okay, so now we're going to look at font pairings. If you're a designer, obviously font pairings needs no introduction. You've probably got your own techniques and your own ways of choosing font pairings. But if you're not a designer, I'm just going to show you something quite simple that you'll be able to apply, because the choice of those two fonts that we've been looking at really makes a difference to your actual design and to your brand. Okay. So there's lots of font pairing resources across the internet. I'm just going to look at this quite basic one called fontpair.co. Now you can see here in the pairings tab where I am now, you can see a whole bunch of pairings. Now the title here is your display font, right? And the paragraph, that's where we've got our main heading and body. We hit the apply all, it's going to apply that second one. Okay, so if you don't have a font yet, the instructions here are just look at this site, start to get your eye in, okay? If you find a pairing that you like, look at the paragraph one first, and then go back into the fonts area and use that as the main heading, and then hit apply all. Then it's going to make the entire fonts set there all in what is the paragraph here on FontPair. Then you'll go to the display font and you'll use what is the title here on FontPair and go and put those in. And as I said, my recommendation is that you'll also do that in the widget title and probably the price. So it's a very simple hack to get in a nice font pairing, even if you know nothing about design. Now you might also recall in the onboarding, I said that in day 3, we're going to be getting an AI to go and design a website for us. It's going to even design a logo, it's going to design layouts, and then I'm going to race through and show you how I can build that from scratch. It's going to be really very quick, and in under half an hour we're going to have a website designed and built from an AI from in no time at all, right? But in that, I already know the font pairing that I'm going to use. I've already decided that I'm going to use this font pairing called Philosopher and Jost. A lot of people say Jost, J-O-S-T. I'm English, I say Jost. But if you see here, if you look at this font pairing, just look at the word Uluru. Okay, it's got an uppercase U and a lowercase u. And here you can see in Philosopher, we can focus in there on our serifs. So you see on the uppercase, we've got the serif there in the top left, and the lowercase, we've got the serif there also in the top left. Well, if we look at the sans serif, our Jost, you can see that there's no serifs. But both words look quite similar, just without the serifs, right? So that makes it a good font pairing. So that's kind of what you're looking out for in font pairing, some similarity between the two. So if I just jump back over to font pair, okay, you can see here the Poiret and the Montserrat. Well, both of these are characterized by this almost absolute circular O, okay? So that makes those two a good font pairing. So if you need some more context to the font pairings, okay, you can just jump back into fontpair.co and look at fonts in use, and you can see how actual businesses have used their font pairings. And again, you're looking at this title and paragraph more often than not to see how they've done it. Except on your mobile site, you've got headings and display, so you've got the option to have two different types of titles, which makes your website a little bit more interesting and a little bit more diverse than the ones that you often see around the internet. Okay, so now go and apply your fonts, and hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration into font pairings and how, as designers, go about thinking about font pairings for our designs.